Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Court Case Podcast with me, Caitlin. Today, we'll be talking about a landmark case in the civil rights movement, Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. So, previously on segregation and racism in the U.S. So, in the South, we have Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws are laws that legally segregated individuals based on race. Some examples of Jim Crow laws are this one from North Carolina, and it says the Utilities Commission is empowered and directed to require the establishment of separate waiting rooms at all stations for the white and colored races. And another example is this Alabamian law pertaining to racial segregation in restaurants. It shall be unlawful to conduct a restaurant or other place for the serving of food in the city, at which white and colored people are served in the same room, unless such white and colored persons are effectually separated by a solid partition extending from the floor upward to a distance of 7 feet or higher, and unless a separate entrance from the street is provided for each compartment. We also have a very, very important case called Plessy v. Ferguson. You've probably heard of it. This is in the 1896 case that included a dude named Homer Plessy. Homer Plessy was only 1/8 African American, and he decided to challenge the Louisiana Separate Car Act, which segregated blacks and whites on trains. Plessy argued that the act violated the 13th and 14th Amendments. In this case, the court ruled the law was constitutional and upheld racial segregation. Segregation was a matter of social equality and not legal equality. Therefore, the government could not interfere. The ruling created the infamous saying, separate but equal. Before this landmark case of Brown v. Board of Education, the NAACP had developed a strategy to hit segregation in education first. With small wins in cases such as Missouri ex rel Gaines v. Canada or Sweet v. Painter, the NAACP built up early success. Cases were first filed to college and graduate schools and then to K through 12 public schools. The background for Brown v. Board of Education. In the 1950s, young student Linda Brown could not attend the white school located close to her home because of the color of her skin. Kansas law permitted segregation in cities of more than 15,000 people, which allowed the Board of Education to establish segregated schools. Instead of attending the white Sumner School, Brown had to walk to a bus stop and catch a long ride to the Monroe School, miles away. The family and others within the black community banded together and sued the board, claiming that their policy violated the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. They brought the case to a federal district court, which ruled that while segregation had obvious detrimental effects on black children, it was not unconstitutional because of the separate but equal ruling in Plessy v. Ferguson. Brown was taken to the U.S. Supreme Court, where it was reviewed along with similar cases from other states. The case of Brown v. Board of Education posed a very important question. Does racial segregation in public schools violate the Equal Protections Clause of the 14th Amendment? In the arguments for Brown, we had Thurgood Marshall, a prominent NAACP lawyer, who argued that segregation in schools had negative effects on a black child's perception of their race. Due to this, whites are made superior and blacks inferior. This could lead to unequal benefits between the races and less motivation for blacks to pursue further education. He also argued that black schools were unequal to white schools due to less money and resources available to them, as well as the location they are forced in. Segregation was argued to be morally wrong, and there is no reason to not desegregate, as there were no negative effects of desegregation of 2 other schools in Topeka. Board argued, on the other side, that the 14th Amendment only said that people had to be treated equally, which means to give them what they need. In relation to education, the defendant argued that students are more comfortable studying with their own race and only have to have equal learning environments. They argue the educational policy was left to the states, not the federal government. In addition, the defendant stated that the possible negative effects of that desegregation would have on neighborhoods, and it would cause students to travel far from their local schools to attend an integrated school. The decision was unanimous. In an amazing unanimous decision under the famous civil rights justice Earl Warren, the case was ruled in favor of Brown. Segregation in public schools violates the 14th Amendment and the Equal Protection Clause. As a central part of American life, education is a foundation of development for children. Although equal on the surface, segregation's effects can create negative effects on the minds of children. Blacks will often feel inferior to whites because of segregation. Plessy v. Ferguson's separate but equal doctrine was finally overturned. A year later, in Brown 2, the court determined schools' desegregation would occur with all deliberate speed under the watchful eye of federal courts. Brown's impact was monumental in chipping away at social racism. It stimulated the civil rights movement, which would eventually lead to monumental acts such as the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act.